Thank you for joining us for the Belkasoft remote acquisition demonstration. My name is Jared Lubert. I am a forensic sales engineer for Belkasoft. Also own my own digital forensic company located down here in Maryland, Gateway Forensics. I will be your technical support point of contact. So whenever you have any sort of issues or questions or concerns and need assistance with any of the programs that we're covering today, or Belkasoft X, I will be that point of contact, and I will give you email, phone numbers at the end of the demonstration today. Support for sales is actually going to be James Cooksey or Addison Cooksey. James Cooksey is the Vice President of Sales here in North America. So the plan of attack for today is to run through a few PowerPoint slides to basically give you an understanding of what Belkasoft Remote Acquisition is, how it works, and how it may help you or your organization perform digital forensic acquisitions remotely. So this portion will probably take 5 to 10 minutes. I'll then dive into a product demonstration on Belkasoft Remote Acquisition. So that will be the agenda for today. And without further ado, I will begin. So what is Belkasoft Remote Acquisition? Well, Belkasoft Remote Acquisition is a digital forensic and instant response software that acquires artifacts and images from remote endpoints. We have the ability to acquire the following items. It could be a remote hard drive or removable drive, selected artifacts if you don't want to acquire the entire hard drive, connected mobile devices, Apples and Androids. Now, this is going to be in Windows machines only, but I will show you that a little bit later on. We also have the ability to acquire RAM. So that's the incorporation of Belkasoft's free RAM capture tool. That's live RAM capture. It's available at belkasoft.com/get. So supported operating systems when it comes to remote acquisition will be Windows and Mac OS platforms. So now what I'm going to do is talk about the agent deployment methods. How we can manage to send this agent remotely to said endpoints in a remote location. Well, it's going to be different based on the platform. When it comes to agent deployment for Windows machines, we have 3 different options. We have a group policy object deployment, and this requires you to be an administrator on a Windows domain. So this is really good for the mass deployment option. So say you're working on instant response case and you need to push agents out to thousands of endpoints at one time. This is going to be your go-to deployment method. You can simply craft a group policy object within the Belkasoft R product, and it'll push the agent out to all of the endpoints. Also, recommend tailoring this GPO to run its startup for this particular service. So that will allow the agent on the endpoint to automatically start and connect to your remote acquisition server anytime that the machine boots up. The second option is Windows Management Instrumentation. So this will require an administrator username and password for the endpoint to which you are trying to deploy the agent. The final Windows deployment option is local, and that could be via a USB thumb drive, whether you've configured it to a specific endpoint, walk to the endpoint, you plug the thumb drive in, and walk back to your remote acquisition server. You can acquire it in that manner as well, but you can also acquire it via SD card in the same manner, or SSH, PuTTY, network share, any way that you can transfer this agent locally from your box, you can do with this option. Now, there are 3 options, and there are 3 different manners in which you can employ these options. So I'll get into that within the actual product itself, but the deployment you choose is kind of based on where you sit behind a router. So if it sounds confusing now, don't worry about it. I will show you what that looks like inside the product. Next is the agent deployment for Mac. Now, seeing as how Mac does not have GPOs or Windows Management Instrumentation options, the only option that we have available for this would be that local USB thumb drive or that network share SSH. However you can connect and push that agent to a machine in your network can kind of be done with this local option. Okay, so Windows acquisition options. So there are going to be quite a few when it comes to Windows devices. So for disk drives, if you want to acquire a full system image, you can do either a physical or a logical acquisition of these drives. This will include your forensic hash verification, and as well as allow you to schedule when you want to acquire it, how you want to store the image, whether on the endpoint, a network share, or send it directly back to the remote acquisition. And you can actually choose when to send it back if you choose to compress it and save it on the endpoint until then. When it comes to artifacts, we would select a logical drive. You browse onto that logical drive, and then you have the option to pick specific artifacts based on categories such as audio, browsers, chats, cloud services, etc. You can pick these types of files or these types of artifacts. So you're basically doing a triage remotely and only grabbing what's absolutely necessary. Next is mobile devices. We do support Android and iOS devices. There are 3 options that are available when it comes to acquisition of mobile devices remotely. Again, these mobile devices have to be connected to a Windows machine with the agent on it. Now, it's not magic. You'd still have to set the phone up the same way you would set it up locally. So if I want to acquire an Android, my first bet is to unlock the phone, go into settings, enable developer options, enable USB debugging, and enable stay awake. So this all still has to be done on that remote phone in order for it to be acquired. And same goes for iOS, the standard setup for iOS devices. Again, it's not magic, but it does allow you to be in multiple places at one time. If you have somebody else that can set the phone up, you can acquire it. So the 3 different options that are available for Android are the ADB backup, the MTP PTP, your media transfer protocol, picture transfer protocol. That'll be your pictures, videos, audio files, maybe a few applications. And then the final is a full file system copy if you found yourself a rooted device. Now, it's important to note that Belkasoft does not root devices, nor do they jailbreak devices, but they do support the acquisition of such. Moving into iOS devices, we have the 3 options, basically the same as Android, but in a iOS fashion. So we have an iTunes backup, we have AFC, Apple File Conduit, which is going to be just like MTP and PTP, your pictures, videos, audio files, maybe a few applications, and then a jailbroken full file system copy. Again, we do not jailbreak them, but we do have the option to acquire them. The final option when it comes to a Windows acquisition type is RAM. You have the option to acquire memory from any endpoint that you deploy an agent to in the click of a button, which can be very handy. Okay, and the macOS acquisition options that are available here are the disk drive. So we can acquire connected physical drives, not the internal Macintosh hard drive. At this specific point in time, I'm not sure of really many forensic software products that can do this. Now, with that being said, if you have a drive connected to the Mac, we can get a full file system copy of that, a bit for bit full system image of that drive. Now, we can, on the flip side of that, to kind of get around it, I know we're not going to get everything, but we can acquire files and folders. So we can do all files and folders, and by specifying the remote folder path that we want to acquire in the Macintosh hard drive to be root. So if we acquire the root folder, we are getting any file that is stored on the Mac itself. Okay, and I had already spoke about these a little bit, but this is a nice little slide for you to look at, just to kind of reiterate on the what type of acquisitions are available when it comes to acquiring mobile devices remotely. Okay, and this is that contact slide that I was telling you about. I can bring this up towards the end of the demonstration, said 5 to 10 minutes. And I think I hit 10 minutes on the dot. So now what I want to do is actually dive into Belkasoft Remote Acquisition and allow you to see, firsthand what the product's actually like. And, I'm excited for you all to get your hands on this software and try it out yourself. So now we're in Remote Acquisition. This is what the remote acquisition server looks like upon first launch. Now, you won't have the endpoints that I have here, the 3 that I have, but you will have everything but these 3. You'll notice up at the top left-hand corner, I have the number of endpoints that I have. You'll notice some cool colors. These colors mean things, and I'll get into what they mean. This is meant to be super simple and super easy for the examiner. So the first thing I want to do is dive into how to set up your remote acquisition server. And the first thing we're going to click on, probably guessed it, is server settings. So if I select server settings, this is going to be where you configure the IP address of your forensic workstation. For me, my server local IP address is this. I've just set up some random port, and I change this often just so I'm not leaving the same port open all the time. Now, you'll notice that I don't have an external IP address listed. Well, that's because during this demonstration, I am sending my agents to endpoints that are on the same network as my forensic workstation is on. Now, because of that, I do not need an external IP address. But if I had plans of deploying an agent outside of my network through a router, I would need my forensic workstation's external IP address in this position. You do have the option to use SSL certificates for Windows devices, so that can be set up here. If you're confused, don't worry. We have this neat little button that says, I need more info. This brings up a 47-page help guide that is hypertext. So if you're like, okay, how do I do my server settings? I click server settings and walk through how to complete it. Again, not complicated, but if you are struggling, that's there. You don't have to be a network guru to make this happen. So that is it when it comes to setting your local IP address or external IP address for your remote server. That's it. There's nothing more to it. Now that I've set my IP address for my remote acquisition server, now I want to deploy agents. So I go down here and I select deploy. So here are my options. Windows and Mac OS. And so I'm going to take a little second to talk about this little string of text up here that says your license allows for 7 more endpoints. You'll notice that I have 3 endpoints here and 7 endpoints here. The default number of endpoints that comes with a basic purchase of Belkasoft Remote Acquisition is 10 endpoints. It is important to note that when you deploy an agent to an endpoint and it connects to the remote acquisition server, that agent is burnt. What does that mean? It means that you can't remove that endpoint and automatically gain another endpoint back in the product. But on the flip side, that agent can stay on that endpoint forever if you wanted it to, and you could collect, anything you wanted from that machine at any time, assuming that you left the agent on that endpoint. The second you delete that agent from that endpoint, it's gone. There's no getting it back. Now, we do have bulk tiered pricings when it comes to agent purchases, and that's something that just can touch on at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to get into the down and dirty of the deployment options of Windows and Mac OS. Now, I know we already talked about it, but I want to show you what it looks like inside the product. So first, I want to click Windows. You'll see we have 3 options. My endpoints are in the same address range as my remote acquisition, the same network. This is where I'm currently at and why I did not have an external IP address in my server settings. Next, my endpoints are on the outside of my remote acquisition address range. So you can see here by this picture that my endpoints are right on the outside of a router, and this is my remote acquisition server. So this is my network, this is my router, the endpoints are just on the other side of it. So you would select this option. Finally, the last option is both endpoints and the remote acquisition server are behind routers. This could be you're sitting here and anywhere in the world you want to acquire these endpoints, this would be the option you would select. Again, if you're lost, you're confused, we do have that help guide, so please lean on that if you need it. Now, again, it's not meant to be complicated, it's meant to be super simple. Now, what option you choose here is going to dictate what is going to be available to you. So let me go up here and select my endpoints are in the same address range as my remote acquisition. If I select next, I'll have 3 deployment options. We talked about these 3 deployment options for Windows devices. We have local with that USB, SSH, file share, SD. And then the next one is the group policy object for mass deployment, and then the Windows management instrumentation. Now, these are the 3 options for a same network deployment option. Select back and say my endpoints are on the outside of my router. If I select next, we lose our group policy deployment option. Well, we're not in the same network. We're not going to push GPOs to some random network outside of our router, right? So that's why it's gone. Now we do still have the Windows Management Instrumentation and the local deployment. Clicking back to this one, finally, same options. We have Windows Management Instrumentation. That's just going to require that username, administrator username and password. This is going to be like the IP address that you want to acquire. So go back. So we've just covered all the different deployment options for Windows. Now we're going to jump into Mac. And as I stated, there's no GPO, there's no Windows Management Instrumentation, so we're only going to have that local deployment. So either one of these that you select are going to give you this option, a local deployment, a USB. Maybe you need to walk it somewhere, but this is how this is done. So say we've done push the agent now, we've configured our server, we've deployed our agents, and now they show up on my basically main page of remote acquisition. So let's look at these three hosts here. So I've deployed 3 agents. You'll see here that I have an accounting, a MacBook Pro. I've got another Mac OS platform, and you can see these platforms, what their actual platforms are over here under OS platform. And that I have a Windows machine. Now, you're probably wondering what these colors are. Well, orange means that there's an agent on this machine, but it's not currently connected to the remote acquisition server. And green, you guessed it, it's connected to the remote acquisition server. If I select this MacBook Pro and try to acquire it, nothing will happen. Now what I can do is edit this. If I select the edit button, you'll notice I've highlighted the endpoint, I selected edit, and now I can come in and change all of this information. I can assign it a color for quick sorting. I can give it a description so I know what machine it is. Notice that if I had ever acquired anything from that machine, its date timestamp will be listed. It would tell me what the status of that acquisition was, the path, the platform, the last time that endpoint connected, who it's assigned to based on what I set it to, and so on. Now, before I dive any further, I just wanted you to see that there are little funnels next to all of these. Well, that's for sorting. So say I sent out thousands of agents and I assigned all agents on HR platforms the color blue. I would go and filter by colors, select the color, and say only show me blue. Select apply. Now I'm only looking at the endpoints that have an agent on, say, an HR workstation. If I want to reset this, I just click it, select reset to default, and all my endpoints are back. Another way that we can look at this is instead of the grid view that we're currently in, we can come up here and select the list view. Selecting list view kind of gives you a baseball card view approach to your endpoints. So it's all up to you, however you want to look at it. This is really just here for user preference. I like to keep it in grid because it's compact and I like simple, so that's where I'm going to keep mine for now. All right. So moving on, one thing I also want to mention is looking at all of the information that's available here. If I were to select this endpoint and select edit, you'll notice I can't change the client IP name. I can't change the client port. I can't change the path, the platform, the domain. So only things that you can change are going to pop up and allow you to change them. This task button, this basically is like a log for anything you've ever done with your remote acquisition. You can say, okay, look, you created a disk image. You created an ADV backup for a remote Samsung Android. It was successful. You did it at this date and time, and it took this long. So very, very cool. There is a server log button that does give you a full log of the server deployment, acquisition, and so on. All right, moving back to endpoints. Now what I want to walk through is the acquisition methods. So I select the one that's green because that's the one that's connected to my remote acquisition server. I select acquire because it's now blue. Select acquire, and these are the 4 acquisition options that I was telling you about. Again, if I were to select, say, a Mac and it was online and select acquire, I would get something like disk drive, and it would try to find connected drives. Or I would get something called files and folders. Those are the 2 options for Mac acquisitions. All right, selecting a drive. What it's doing now is it is querying that remote computer. It's identifying what drives are available. Hovering over the drives gives you information about the drive. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get a serial number drive model in here. You'll notice this is a physical drive and a logical drive. So if I wanted to do a full system image of that drive, it wants me to choose whether I want to transfer that image directly back to my remote acquisition server, or if I want to store the image on the endpoint before the upload. Now this does allow for compression to save space, so just for the sake of this demonstration, I will go ahead and do that. If I select next, you'll see that I have two different image formats that I can acquire this image with. I can do either a DD raw image, or I can do an E01. We have the checksum, SHA-1, 256, MD5, selecting one of these or two of these, and verifying output, always a great idea. If you're planning on transferring this around, you can create a multi-part image. You can chunk it up into sizes of your choosing. So let's just say you want to do 10 meg chunks. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but it's an option. So you can make it however big or however small you want and create that multi-part image so it'll transfer a little bit easier. I select next, and it says, okay, thank you for those settings. Now, when the acquisition should start, do you want to do it now? Do you want to start it maybe this evening whenever your employees go home for work? When do you want to upload it to the server? Do you want to upload it when it's complete? How about overnight, so the bandwidth is not taken up in the middle of the day? And how about delete the local image? Okay, well that's good. We don't want to leave an image on that local endpoint. So you can check this box and choose to delete the local image upon the completion of sending it back to your remote server. I select next. We'll get a verification screen saying, okay, this is the IP address. It's scheduled to start at 1920. This is the endpoint image path. This is where it is acquiring from. This is the server image path, and this is what the image name is going to be. You can see that these are variable based, but you can certainly change this to whatever you want it to be. So this is kind of your, hey, check your settings. This is what you chose to do. You wanted a raw image format. You wanted it multi-part. You had SHA-1, MD5, and you wanted to verify output. And then you would select start. Now I'm not going to do this, but that was basically a walkthrough of how that's done. So let's go back to acquire. Let's go to artifacts, and you can see that we have the logical drives for us to choose from. Now we can always refresh this to try to get new drives if someone plugs one in while we're attempting to acquire. But from here, okay, let's just go into C drive, and then we'll go through the whole order again. Do you want to transfer it back, or do you want to store an image and then load it later? For this one, let's just transfer an image directly. So I select next. Let's do SHA-1 and verify output. And now we get to pick what artifacts we actually want to acquire. Now I can choose all, or I can click audio, select specific audio files. I can choose chats and select specific chats. I can go mail and go by different operating platforms. So I can do all mail. I can do Outlook. I mean, you name it. You basically can do really whatever you want. Just grab what you want, select next. And again, when do you want to start it? Do you want to do it now? Do you want to do it later? Select next, look at your options, and select start. Super simple. It's not meant to be complicated. All right, mobile. I'm not going to dive into this too much because I already talked about it. Here's your three options. Apple, three options. Again, they have to be connected to a Windows device, and they have to be unlocked and set up appropriately in order to acquire them. Okay, and RAM, acquire the RAM of your local machine. Give me a SHA checksum. Don't worry about verifying the output. Start it then, upload it now, delete the local image upon completion, and begin. Super simple. You can see it's saved in non-proprietary image format of .mem. And that's also something I want to touch on as well. So if you were to acquire a iPhone backup or something, you would get a tar file. If you wanted to acquire the Android backup with ADB, you'd get an AB file. So these aren't proprietary image files that can't be loaded into any tool. They're standard image formats, and they can be loaded into any tool of your choosing, but I would recommend Belkasoft X. Okay, let's move back. So those are your acquisition options. Again, that is the extent of Belkasoft Remote Acquisition. Again, super simple, and you know it's meant to be easy for you. Again, if you have any questions when it comes to remote acquisition, I am here. I am available for any of those questions, but that is what I have for remote acquisition.